Welcome to FO Talks. With me is Gary Grappo. He is the former chair of the board of Fair Observer. He's still on the board. More importantly, for today's purposes, he was the head of the office of the Peace Quartet. He ran that office when Tony Blair was in charge. Tony Blair is still in the game. Gary obviously has left for greener pastures. He is in Italy right now, so he has actually left to enjoy La Dolce Vita, whilst the Middle East still continues to rumble and roil. And the three witches of Macbeth, whoever you want to call them, some are calling them Donald Trump, Bibi Netanyahu, and Tony Blair, conjure up a magic potion. So let's talk about the peace deal. The fighting has stopped. The hostages have been returned. Some dead bodies have been returned. Aid is flowing into Gaza. Does Donald Trump now get a Nobel Peace Prize?
Not likely.
Why not? He brought peace. He brought peace to the Middle East.
What he has done, and it's really important as we look at his 20-point plan.
Let me stop you right there. So now that you're getting into the 20-point plan, tell us what exactly is the deal and give us a little bit of, obviously, color on the 20-point plan as well, sir.
Yeah, well, the 20-point plan was intended to bring the fighting to a stop in Gaza and prompt the release of the Israeli hostages held by Hamas. And it has succeeded for the most part in doing that. And it's important to keep that in mind. Moreover, and I will just say this at the outset, this is probably the best chance that the Israelis and the Palestinians have had in at least a decade and probably more in addressing some of the problems that they have faced over the lifetime of this conflict. Now, this 20-point plan doesn't necessarily do all of that. I have seen references to this as a Middle East peace plan. It is not a Middle East peace plan. It is very specific to Gaza, with the exception of two final points at the very end of that plan. It's also important to point out that, with the exception of the secondary input of Hamas, because they were pretty much arm twisted into accepting this, there was no Palestinian input whatsoever. This was a deal conjured by outsiders, whether it's the Americans, some of the Gulf Arabs, or Egypt. They were the ones who played, or Turkey. They are the ones who played the major role in making this happen. So what is the plan?
The current and the former imperial powers and the wannabe imperial powers.
Isn't that a surprise? Let's take a look at some of the key points of that plan. I'm certainly not going to cover all 20 points. But the plan calls, after, of course, the release of the hostages and the return of the remains of the deceased hostages, which is still ongoing, and the return of Palestinian prisoners to either the West Bank or mostly to Gaza. The establishment of a temporary transitional government, which will govern Gaza. We're only talking about Gaza here.
Not West Bank. Our listeners and viewers should realize that this plan does not address West Bank. That's a separate can of worms.
Most definitely, you would say a can of worms, and I'd say a basket of snakes, but nevertheless, the plan only addresses Gaza. So the transitional government for Hamas, for Gaza, that would not include either directly or indirectly Hamas. So that's obstacle number one. That is, Hamas will not be a part of this transitional authority. The plan also calls for the termination of all military, terror, and offensive infrastructure of Hamas. This would include weapons, tunnels, production facilities. The actual language talks about weapons placed permanently beyond use through a decommissioning process. It's unclear what exactly that decommissioning process would entail, and it's very uncertain at the moment whether, in fact, Hamas will comply with that. There are indications from outsiders who are involved in this saying they're prepared to do that. I remain skeptical. But
I mean, the King of Jordan has just come out today and said
yes.
that foreign troops are unlikely to get involved.
No, this is the thing, is that, and that leads me to this next point, and this is the International Stabilization Force. The International Stabilization Force is intended to sort of maintain law and order in Gaza. No indication at all that it would take up the role that the Israeli Defense Forces have played heretofore in terms of tamping down Hamas. And as King Hussein indicated earlier today, I believe it was on the BBC, that no country wants to put themselves between the Israelis and Hamas. And so it's unclear how this stabilization force will play any role whatsoever in the decommissioning of weapons belonging to Hamas. So that's a major question mark hanging over all of this, is how exactly does Hamas give up its weapons, if it in fact does. Now, I will say that the U.S. is currently standing up a civil military coordination center. There are about 200 U.S. troops involved in that. It's being set up on Israeli territory right outside of Gaza. The administration has gone to great lengths to assure Americans that no U.S. forces will be in Gaza proper, which is
no threat to American lives. American soldiers will not be risking life and limb patrolling the mean streets of Gaza.
Certainly not
Gaza.
Not in Gaza itself. It's not to say that they're entirely 100% safe, even in Israel, as we well know. But nevertheless, the countries who will actually participate in the Civil Military Coordination Center is unclear beyond the United States and Israel.
Very quickly, I'm told that fundamentally the U.S. military is taking care of the logistics of aid in the immediate term. They are overseeing distribution of aid to millions of Gazans, and already hunger has come down. Would that be fair to infer?
Yes, but they're on the aid distribution. They're playing an indirect role because the aid organizations have largely been vetted by Israel already. Israel knows who they are. They have an established track record in terms of delivering aid to those most in need. They're far less prone to the corruption that was inherent before in terms of pilferage, actual robbery. So they're pretty much able to carry out these functions autonomously. They are going to need security, which points out the importance of this stabilization force getting itself established and on the ground, and that's what this coordination committee ultimately will lead to. So for the time being, the security of these aid convoys who are going in and the distribution centers is provided by the Israelis, at least in those areas where the Israelis are present now. And Israel has withdrawn from 50% of the territory of Gaza. And beyond that, they're sort of relying on, dare I say, Hamas, and therefore there is the potential for compromise. And in some areas, these family gangs, so to speak, excuse me, who also provide a very small measure of of security in limited areas.
Mm-hmm.
Up to this point, there does not seem to be a problem. Most of the problem is logistics, transportation. But you're right, aid is getting in now. We're seeing fewer reports of famine and so forth in Gaza, and it's something to be applauded. And I think as this process moves forward, the news on that front will be even more encouraging. One of the other major concerns observers tend to have, and certainly I do, is the investment that's going to be required to rebuild Gaza. We're looking at a population that was about 2.2 million, about 2 million of whom today are without housing. At a minimum, 80% of the housing in Gaza has been severely damaged or destroyed. So what about the immediate housing needs, and what about the long-term housing needs? We're also talking about a similar level of destruction on businesses and farming in Gaza. How are Gazans going to make a living in the future going ahead when the infrastructure on which they relied, as limited as it was before the war, has been almost totally destroyed? And it's going to require enormous amount of investment to rebuild that.
What we are hearing and what we are seeing from people on the ground is that Gaza is largely rubble. This is, as someone said, this is like going to Dresden at the end of World War II, only worse. Or actually, some are even comparing it to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That may be an exaggeration, but it is a hellscape right now.
Indeed it is. And of course, all of those reports, other than what we're actually seeing with overhead photography, Google Earth and others, is secondhand. We're still awaiting the ability of the international media to gain access to Gaza, and that has yet to be forthcoming, and it's something I very much want to see. This is the BBCs, the CNNs, the New York Times, the Financial Times, and other foreign media gaining entry into Gaza, reporting firsthand on what they see and what they're being told by the people of Gaza. We have not gotten that in 2 years, and we need to have that in order to make an objective assessment of what the situation truly is. But it is desperate. And there's no downplaying the level of destruction in Gaza.
Some people involved in aid distribution have told us in conference that things are probably the direst they've seen. Obviously, other places where they've worked have not been as urban. They've worked in Sudan, they've worked elsewhere in Africa. But this is quite heartrending because you see flattened out apartment blocks. And remember, Gaza was de facto an urban slum. 2 million people lived in a tiny strip.
Yes.
And 3 million people, actually.
Yeah, I wouldn't characterize all of it as an urban slum, but it was very densely populated. The public services that were available back then were inadequate. Yeah. They're almost non-existent today. I'm talking about water, sewers, power, and the like, communication.
Basics. Water, sewage, power, drinking water,
communication,
basic education.
Yes, all of that has largely been decimated. And so we'll have a chance to see firsthand when the media gets in there with journalists reporting on it, and of course photography, film, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think this is what would really wake up the world. But the real question is, and this is what I am concerned about, is we all know that it's going to take an extraordinary level of funding, both on the humanitarian side and on the investment side. Are countries around the world willing to step up and do that? Now, there are countries in the world who have done it in the past when these conflicts between Israel and Hamas have flared up episodically, and countries have stepped up and provided funds for the rebuilding of Gaza. Are they going to do it this time, and are they going to do it at the levels that are required? Because the levels that are going to be required this time are exponentially greater than what they have been in the past.
Yeah,
and
damage is exponentially greater. So
that's exactly. And the question they're all going to ask is, what assurances do we have that if we pour the billions that are going to be required for the humanitarian and rebuilding efforts, the World Bank has estimated between 50 and 60 billion, I think. If they step forward with this, what assurances do they have that 5-10 years down the road, they're not confronted with the same situation that we have today? And that prompts the ultimate question. Is there a political solution? Were there a genuine political solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, then the odds would be fairly great that you'd have Arab countries, the EU countries, the United States, and others stepping up with the funding required. But absent that political solution, I'm not sure. Now, I understand that the Trump administration is quietly applying pressure to a lot of governments, but they have been through this ringer not once, not twice, but many times.
So let me stop you there and let's take a step back. The war went on for a while. October 7th was 2023. So it lasted over 2 years. Joe Biden tried to bring peace. He didn't succeed. Donald Trump tried as well. It's been months since he was elected. What led to this deal? Why this deal and why now?
As in many occasions of this nature where you have a long-running, festering conflict, there's some triggering event. Mm-hmm. And in this case, it was the Israeli attack on the Hamas leadership based in Doha, Qatar. Launching an attack on a law-abiding, peaceful country miles away, thousands of miles away, was beyond the pale, in particular in the mind of Donald Trump. This has been reported. It's known that he was...
The Financial Times did a really long story saying that Donald Trump had to choose between Israel and Qatar, and he chose Qatar, finally.
He did. He chose Qatar because he knows what's at stake, because all the Gulf countries came together and made a very strong statement against this attack. This was an attack on a peaceful country. And whether...
With the biggest American base in the Middle East.
Oh, yes, and the largest U.S. base in the Middle East, and a very important base for the United States in the Middle East, jeopardizing a very important relationship, not only with Qatar, but with all the other Gulf countries, and in particular Saudi Arabia, just right across the straits there. And in fact, this infuriated Donald Trump. And he communicated his anger to Bibi Netanyahu. Netanyahu comes to the United States and was subjected to the humiliation of sitting in the president's office, or an office in the White House, and being handed a phone, calling the Emir of Qatar and apologizing, and having it filmed or photographed at least. I don't know if they recorded the actual conversation. That was humiliating, apologizing for having attacked a peaceful state, Qatar. And that started the ball rolling. Mm-hmm. I think it gave President Trump the momentum that he needed to apply further pressure on Bibi and force him to sit down and accept a deal that's ending the conflict, at least for the time being, in Hamas. But also, and equally important, putting pressure on some key Arab states, Qatar being one, but also Egypt, Turkey, and others to put pressure on Hamas to also accept this agreement. Because, and this is not often said, but this agreement differs very, very little from the agreement that Joe Biden was putting forward practically 1 year ago. There's very little difference between this and the agreement that Biden had tabled. What is different is the circumstances. And it was the pressure on Bibi, the pressure on these basically allied governments, who in turn put it on Hamas, that you have to accept it. And it left them no out, really. I think it's also important to understand, and I'm sure this was communicated by President Trump to Bibi, not that the Israelis were already aware, but Israel was paying a very, very high price in the international community. Their stock around the world has dropped precipitously over the course of this conflict, and Donald Trump basically said, you need to arrest this now if you're going to salvage any kind of a reputation going forward. There was talk among some countries of putting trade sanctions on Israel were this war to continue much longer. And so Israel was reaching the point where it had to come to some agreement that it could swallow. And thankfully, Donald Trump was there with it. And they have this accord. So these are the events that I think led up to this agreement happening, and the two sides agreeing to it, even though neither one truly wanted it. And if you were to lock them in a room today, they would tell you that. They still don't want it.
Why don't they want it? Let's get into that. What's the problem? Why? One understands Bibi. Bibi has a right-wing government. Bibi is beholden to Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, two lunatics of the far right. And Bibi now looks weak. Bibi seems to have folded to Donald Trump's pressure. So it's not very good for him politically. And there are questions right now as to how long he'll last. And Donald Trump advocating his pardon on the floor of the Knesset, I don't know how you pronounce it, Knesset, might have put paid to his chances of ever having a pardon.
Well, I mean, obviously, his conservative supporters are playing this deal up, saying Israel got everything it wanted. I wouldn't say everything, but to a certain extent, they were certainly more favorably treated in this deal than was Hamas. But there are some fundamental facts to this conflict, and I'm speaking of the conflict between Israel and Hamas. They're well established. They should be well known. First, Hamas does not want to disarm, and it does not want to give up its role in Palestine's future, political future. These are two givens with respect to Hamas. They're not going to disarm, and they're certainly not going to step back from a role in governance, despite what the plan calls for. So that's Hamas. Very simple, straightforward. But Israel's as straightforward as well. Israel, in fact, doesn't want to withdraw completely from Gaza. And they're just simply biding their time for the trap to fall. And one of the elements of the 20-point plan is not fulfilled, giving them the excuse that they'll need to move further into Gaza, or at least resist moving further out, which is what the plan calls for. It calls for a progressive withdrawal. At the moment, they control 50%, and then it draws down from there. All elements of the plan. It's probably
the first time Donald Trump has used the word progressive.
He probably wouldn't choose the word. But I will also say that with respect to Israel, they don't want to agree on accepting a Palestinian state. And that brings me to the two final points of the plan, which are really highly suspect in my mind, and that is placing the conditions for a credible path toward Palestinian self-determination, fulfilling the aspiration of the Palestinian people. That's anathema to certainly to Bibi Netanyahu and to the Israeli right. And then ultimately, the United States facilitating a dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians on a political horizon for peaceful and prosperous coexistence. Those are the only 2 points of the plan that address the broader contours of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Everything else is all Gaza-centric. But those two take into account, although it's not specifically mentioned, the Palestinians of the West Bank. It's implied. And that's why I think there's a fundamental disconnect in the fact that Israel, at this point in time, and it wasn't that way, say 25 to 30 years ago, but at this point in time, Israel is simply unwilling to accept a Palestinian state. And it's not clear from Hamas's perspective if they're ever willing to accept the existence of a Jewish state in the Middle East, because their charter says quite clearly that they're not.
A very good European friend said both sides actually want genocide. Hamas would like to do away with the Jewish state and send them all back to Europe or wherever they've come from. And the Ben Gvir and Smotrich want to push all the Gazans out to the sea or into Egypt across Rafah. Actually, what both sides want is ethnic cleansing.
I'm not going to go that far, but certainly the extremes, Hamas being one, and the extreme right in Israel, have their own agendas. But in terms of the government of Israel, would they be able to live with a truly pacified Gaza? And I think they would. The question is, can we have a truly pacified Gaza as long as Hamas is present? And most Israelis, if not all of them, would say it's not possible. So we need to cross that threshold where Hamas does not present a security threat to either the state of Israel or to Israelis. And that's important to point out. So major obstacles here to be overcome. And it remains at this stage, and we're still only, 2 weeks into this plan, it remains very unclear to me on the likelihood of all of that happening.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question that Rory Stewart, another person who thinks about international politics a lot. He did philosophy, politics, and economics. He was tutor to William and Harry. You probably know him. Served in Basra. Rory's been talking ad nauseum about, look, what is the international law element here? The UN has been ignored. If troops go in, what right do they have? Who gives them the right? This is a deal where there's been no involvement of the locals, and it's really difficult. In Northern Ireland, for instance, civil society was involved, Sinn Féin was involved, and he also pointed out most recently that, look, this is what in economics some people, when they call a particularly difficult problem, they call it a wicked problem, because you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. If you don't involve Hamas, they are not going to buy into whatever you decide. And if you involve Hamas, it's unlikely they are going to change their stripes. So you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. And he gave the example of the Taliban coming back after $1 trillion spent in Afghanistan. Comment a little bit on the aspects of international law and local participation.
In my view, to give this plan additional gravitas, particularly the gravitas that comes from the international community, the plan should be submitted to the UN Security Council for an official blessing by the international community. In the past, this is what has been done. I can't say on every occasion, but it would give the sort of imprimatur, so to speak, of this deal gravitas that the international community can convey, and maybe impart just a little bit additional momentum to the plan. At the end of the day, it's going to rely on three critical factors. The two most important are going to be the genuine will and intentions of the two major parties, Israel and Hamas. And the third is the persistent, energetic, and determined application of pressure and involvement of the United States, including Donald Trump himself. Donald Trump is supposed to be in charge nominally of this governing board that was called for in this transition authority in Gaza. Tony Blair would be running it, apparently on a day-to-day basis.
So is Tony Blair the new viceroy of Gaza?
Well, I mean, one of many titles he could presumably assume if this becomes reality. And so getting the official blessing, I think, of the UN Security Council would be helpful in this case to impart some legality to everything that is happening. But I think we have to be honest and say that neither the Trump administration nor Bibi Netanyahu seems interested in doing this or even cares much about it, even though it would enhance the plan and maybe bring a bit of additional pressure upon Hamas to conform to its obligations under the plan. And, of course, Israel's as well. But it's unclear. At the end of the day, the plan is the plan. It's going to continue, and it will continue on the basis of how much the Trump administration is willing to put into it, and the two parties are willing to commit themselves to it. So far, progress has been, I would say, respectable, and it will give some measure of hopefulness, but we're still in the easy phase of it, and it's going to become far more complicated when we stand up this transitional governing authority, the security force. Those things are going to be absolutely critical to fulfilling all the elements of the plan.
So you've mentioned the governing body, you've mentioned the security forces. I mean, the governing body, will Tony Blair sit and rule from London, or will he come and sit in Jerusalem? Who's going to provide? Then let's get on to troops. Who will supply the troops? Will it be Egypt? Will it be Pakistan? Jordan seems unlikely to be interested. We could go on. There are so many pitfalls and so many stages of the process where everything could go belly up. And my question to you is, will the deal hold? And of course, both of us are old enough, and you were actually involved in this peace process. Both of us vividly remember the handshake between Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat. It was heralded as a new moment in the Middle East, the chance for peace, a historic rapprochement. And we know how that ended. It ended with Rabin getting killed. And of course, it was Bibi Netanyahu who was particularly vociferous against that peace deal. So fast forward 20 odd years, new peace deal, will it hold?
That question can't be answered now, and because of some of the obstacles that we just discussed, and these are not simple. These are huge. They're enormous, and I'll have to be honest. I think the odds are not even 50-50 in their favor right now, despite what President Trump might say. Putting the transitional authority together, putting together this security force are going to be very, very challenging. Although there are indications that some countries are willing to participate in this security force, the only country I know of that has specifically said something, and I don't think it was an official statement, is Indonesia. Egypt, a lot of people have talked about Egypt. They're certainly capable of doing it. They're certainly in the right position to do it. But Egypt occupied Gaza before 1967, and it wasn't a picnic back then. And things are infinitely more complicated today. And it's uncertain whether Sisi is going to commit an element of his forces, and it won't be a small number, to run this force, obviously with the support of other countries. Who else would be in it? Well, we already know that Netanyahu has said Turkey can't participate. He's unwilling to accept Turkey's participation. Okay, so who else? We could run down the list of possible countries. Pakistan has been another. It's not directly involved, but it's a Muslim country. Certainly a possibility. They are familiar with peacekeeping responsibilities, as is Indonesia. So both countries are very capable of doing this. But it's important to point out and to reiterate what King Abdullah said earlier today, and that is that no country is going to put itself between Israel and Hamas. That's just a given. And if it's going to require that, then this is not going to work. And so we go back to our original question, will Hamas disarm? And we can't answer that. There have been subsequent statements made by officials of Hamas that it is not going to fully disarm. Well, that's a problem then.
So the Israeli point of view is this is just round one. Round two is coming. And that is something that I gleaned from Joseph Olmert, one of our regular authors. You know the family. His elder brother was Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, who resigned actually and went to jail very honorably. I mean, it wasn't very honorable going to jail, but he said, I want to show that Israel is a democracy where the Prime Minister is not above the law. So the Olmerts, have played a major role in Israeli history, and it seems that they, along with so many other Israeli friends, they just think it is round two, and the same is the sentiment I'm gleaning from the Palestinians, because they think it would be suicidal for Hamas to disarm, because if they did so, then they would certainly be killed. The Israelis are not going to spare them. And so, in a way, the die is cast.
That's why I insist. It's to me inconceivable that a group like Hamas, founded as an armed resistance organization, is going to disarm and still be a resistance movement. I don't see how that can happen. I mean, could it transition to a political organization? Well, theoretically, yes, it could, but will it? And I don't think it will because of the objectives that pretty much every Hamas member has, and certainly the Hamas leadership, such as it is today, because obviously they have suffered considerable losses among their top leaders. So it's inconceivable to me. And from the perspective of Israelis, it's inconceivable to them to imagine themselves truly safe as long as one member of Hamas has a rifle with ammunition. And this is it's existential for both sides. That's how they see it. However we outsiders may see it is immaterial to either one of them. And therefore, the odds of this are not good. However, and I want to reiterate the point I made at the outset, this is the best chance the region has had in over a decade. And every party in the world should seize on it to do everything that can be done to ensure that it succeeds. And if Donald Trump gets his Peace Prize as a result of it, well, good for him, because he truly will have done something monumental. But I'll just simply say that Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat got the Nobel Peace Prize for that handshake on the Oslo Accords on the White House lawn in September of 1993. And they probably regretted that decision not more than a few years later with the assassination of Rabin, and then things basically falling apart, most definitely by year 2000. So we're going to have to see some really major efforts taken by not only the actual parties, but by outside parties to make this work, whether it's investment in humanitarian aid that's going to be required, whether it's the political organization, whether it's the humanitarian undertaking to ensure that Gazans are cared for. One real concern I have is about all the children of Gaza, and not a few in Israel as well, who have suffered extraordinary trauma as a result of this conflict, which will impact all of them for the rest of their lives. How do the people in Gaza, people in the West Bank, Palestinians in general, and the people in Israel contend with the trauma that's been inflicted on their children today? I don't have an answer to that. I just don't know. But I know it's something they will have to grapple with.
Let me ask you a broader question. Can you solve the Gaza issue without addressing West Bank?
Ultimately, no. The two are inseparable. The 20-point plan does call for Palestinian reform. And as a result of that, presumably successfully being done, that they can begin to look at the possibility of this Palestinian state. That was probably the most bitter pill that Bibi had to swallow in this plan. And that's really the only direct reference to the Palestinian Authority.
So very quickly for our viewers, very quickly for our viewers and listeners, sorry to interrupt. West Bank borders Jordan, and as you've suspected, it is on the western side of Israel. Gaza is on the south.
On the eastern side of Israel, on the western side of Jordan.
Exactly. Sorry, it's on the western side of Israel and the eastern side to the east of Jordan. Gaza is to the south.
It's west of Jordan, east of Israel.
Oh, sorry, yes, I'm swapping my directions, yes. It's east of Israel and west of Jordan. My apologies. So east of Israel, west of Jordan. It is the West Bank because it is the West Bank of the Jordan River.
Exactly.
And Gaza is to the southeast of Israel, and it borders Egypt. Egypt is to the south of Gaza. They are separated by Israel. They are not geographically contiguous, but they are the two territories where Palestinians live, and Ariel Sharon took settlers out of Gaza, and so Gaza is completely Palestinian, but West Bank has a number of Jewish settlers, and the settlements have increased, and the US has repeatedly objected, I believe for over a decade, if I'm not mistaken, Gary. You probably were also drafting the objections at one point, and the increase of settlements has continued unabated, and probably you could argue under this government has grown on steroids. So when we are talking about Gaza, that's southeast, and then West Bank is southeast, and then southwest southwest of Israel, and then of course when we are talking about West Bank to the east of Israel and west of Jordan, we are talking about two different territories. And Hamas has controlled Gaza since the election, I believe, in 2006, 2005, the only election. After that, they had no elections. And West Bank is controlled by the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, who's still in charge. So a geriatric leader. And now in the West Bank, Hamas apparently, reportedly, is popular, particularly because of the aggression of the settlers. Over to you, Gary. So when you say that you have to solve both of them, how do you solve such a complicated Swiss cheese problem?
Well, there was a time when we were getting very, very close, and there were solutions on the table, and the two sides, when they were talking and negotiating, and these were all, of course, supported by the United States, as well as other countries. That the EU played a significant role. Arab countries supported it, and the countries got very, very close. There was a process in place, certainly in 2000, and then I would say 2007, 2008. They were very, very close, particularly in 2000, 2001. And so it is possible. The problem today is the level of trust among the parties is as low as it's ever been. I would say in Israel, the willingness to accept the two-party state, or the two-state plan enjoys no more than I would say 20%, and I'm being generous. And it's probably even fewer than that in the Palestinian territories at the moment. And this is because of the extraordinary absence of trust between the two sides. Back in the day, I want to say in the late 90s and the very early 2000s, the level of trust was a bit higher, and the willingness to pursue this when there was a much higher likelihood of success was there. Today, none of that is present. Absolutely none.
So both societies have become radicalized.
I won't say radicalized. I mean, there are certainly elements in both societies that are radicalized, even more radicalized than we've ever seen in the past. Not ever in the past, but certainly radicalized than we've seen in the recent past. They are just far more jaded and far more resistant to the idea of a two-state solution because they don't think it's possible. But of course, the one-state solution that would see a state comprised of both Israelis and Palestinians is equally unlikely and equally unpalatable to both sides. So what alternative exists? And the folks who involved in this were involved in it, remain involved in it, almost go in circles in arguing, for example, two-state solution being dead, but then finding themselves in an uncomfortable position of not having an alternative and looking again at a two-state solution, which at the moment the societies are not prepared to accept. This is not to say they could not accept it. Were there a leadership in place committed to achieving genuine peace between the two sides, to a peace that brings justice to Palestinian aspirations, that brings genuine security to Israel, things could change, and we might reach a moment that we briefly enjoyed in the mid to late 90s. But we're certainly not there today, far from it. And it's going to take a lot of work. And so this plan could be the initial step forward. And were it to succeed in some way in the initial steps, that we have mentioned earlier, the transitional authority, the security force, disarming of Hamas, and so forth, that would provide the momentum that it needs, and also getting the imprimatur of UN Security Council to give this the momentum that it needs to start a broader, more far-reaching Middle East peace that addresses both Gaza as well as the West Bank. We're not there yet. We're not even close to that point at this moment. Focus on this plan, this step, moving the step forward, or this plan forward in a stepwise fashion. And that's challenge enough right now. And that's why I say it's going to require the continuing earnest attention of Donald Trump. And we all know that this administration, including the president himself, has a bit of a short attention span. And you have to sort of create a crisis that gets his attention. And you don't want to do that. The plan is not strong enough to withstand another crisis. You have to be able to foresee these crises and tamp them down before they occur. And that's going to require the president's, as I said, constant attention and deliberate involvement in advancing this plan.
It is like asking a 5-year-old to stay away from ice cream.
When he has, or she has 5 bowls sitting in front of him. These all look too good. Why should I? Give me one good reason.
Yeah. No, you shouldn't eat ice cream, because actually, in the long run, you should be eating your broccoli instead.
And the broccoli in this case is most distasteful to both sides. And so I would look. We've all been down this path before.
I mean, you have seen it up close and personal, Gary.
Yes, I've got the dust on my boots still from having trodden this path, and I've had my hopes raised on so many occasions, only to have the rug pulled out and things collapse and to be disappointed. And I hope that doesn't happen again. I think this is a good start. I think the president deserves credit for this good start, but he better not take his eyes off of this, because if he does, this will go off the rails, and it can happen very, very quickly.
Well, thank you for your time, Gary. Get some respite from the Middle East. Enjoy Italy, and we'll see you very soon to discuss other matters. If you've liked this discussion, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure you sign up for our newsletters. And we are running our 2025 crowdfunding campaign. The whole idea is that we stay independent, so make sure you sign up and become a recurring donor. Thank you very much, and we'll see you very soon.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.